Hi, everyone. This is an overview of Chapter 2. And in this chapter, its focus is the invention of race. And so, what you'll review is the colonization of the Americas by the Spanish and the British. And I know that some of this will be, of course, or at least hopefully will be, a review of what you might have learned in high school or even in a college history class. But it is important to review how we came to be the country that we are. And of course, the colonization of the Americas by the Spanish and the British was very profound. It's estimated that there were somewhere around 10 to 15 million, depending upon the historian, um, Native Americans living here in what we now call the United States. And yet, um, this population of people we call Native American really only constitute about 1% of the American population. And so when I say it was a profound impact on indigenous peoples that were here, I'm not exaggerating because these communities, these tribes, these peoples were almost completely decimated from this continent in ways that were often very brutal, um, and we need to be aware of that and keep that in our minds. There's also a discussion, of course, of the slave trade and how the slave trade uh, was an influential part of helping the new colonies grow their economies, and certainly long after the North largely stopped using slavery, although there were parts of the North that did, but the South continued far in a much greater number and on a far larger scale, continued using slavery more so than the North after some period of time. And so it's important to think about what it meant for people who were forcibly taken from their countries, put on a ship in a very crowded space, only to spend months in this crowded space in a dark hole below deck with very little food, with no place to bathe or use the restroom, etc. And of course, you can imagine how quickly disease would spread. I have been fortunate enough to travel a lot in my lifetime, and I once, this was probably back in 2001, maybe 2002, I was in, I was on an island off the coast of Tanzania, and it's a beautiful little island. It's called Zanzibar. The waters were so warm and clear, but I had an opportunity to go to a city on the island. The city on the island, there's still a part of the city that's called Stonestown. And this is the area that has been preserved by the island people as a memorial of the slave trade and what holding places, for lack of a better word, looked like during the slave trade. And I had an opportunity to go down below to an area where people were held until they were put on ships. And it was a dark, tight space with very little ventilation. Um, and it was very eerie, very powerful experience to see how people were treated as less than human, of course, but even less than animals. It almost seemed it was a very powerful experience. So anyway, discussion about that, and of course the manifest destiny. Once the colonists, and then later it became, of course, the U.S. There was this movement toward the West, and of course Caucasians, whites tended to call it manifest destiny, and how all that played out for the people that were already living in these areas of what we now call the United States. And I there's an interesting thing for me, a struggle for me. This is just a personal thing. I've always called myself Chicana, and when I was very young, I used to call myself Mexican. But as I got older and got a little wiser, you know. And by the way, it's with the X, Xicanx, Chicanx. Now, because that's, you know, put X on everything. Uh, and I never really thought much about my mom's stories because my mom often didn't tell the truth. That she was Yaqui Indian, and you know, she's long dead now. But several years ago, I did get one of those DNA tests done, and I found out that she must not have been lying because I'm about 57, a little over 57% Native American according to that test. So of course, I probably got a little bit from my dad's side because my dad is also from Mexico. And so, but there's a not a struggle really, but I now think of myself as Native American, but I don't call myself that so much just because I'm not registered with any tribe. There is a Yaqui tribe that lives, they have a reservation down near Tucson, Arizona, but I have no way of proving that ancestry through my mother. She was born in Mexico, in Sonora, in the mountains, and people didn't travel for days to try to register their children. So I don't call myself Native American, but I internally think of myself that way now that I have this information, and I now know maybe that my mom wasn't lying. And when I've talked to people who are Yaqui, what they say to me is the border is what separated our people. You know, we're all one people. It's just the border separated us. And when I think about it that way, I think, well, yeah, you know, they're right. But anyway, so little personal story there. Sorry, sidetrack. Also, discussion in the text about Asian immigrants, and I know everyone's heard of Ellis Island, but did you know that there was a Ellis Island of the West? If you didn't, it is up in the Bay Area. It is one of the islands off the coast of San Francisco. No, not Alcatraz. That was the prison. It's called Angel Island, and the buildings are still there. They're still standing, and it's been turned into a national park, meaning that you can take a ferry there now and pay a fee, and you can go and look through the buildings, etc. And I had an opportunity to go there when it first opened, and one of the things that was really profound to me was all the poetry. Well, I'm assuming it was poetry or stories or, you know, writings that people made on the walls. And those walls have been left as they are. And I don't read any Asian languages, but I bet you if somebody went and translated all those and put them into a book, it would be a bestseller. That gives me an idea. Anyway, so this is a chapter that may sometimes be not depressing, because that's too strong a word, but it may be somewhat of a downer in parts of it. But so I'd like to leave you with this thought that the history we cannot change, but if we learn from the knowledge that we gain and we try to use that knowledge, then of course change is possible. So there's my little word. There's my little. Those are my words of wisdom for the downer parts of this chapter. I'll see you next week for chapter 3 summary.